Court of Appeal has set aside the judgment of the Federal High Court in Umuahia, which voided the provision of Section 84, subsection 12 of the Electoral Act 2022. In a judgment, a three-member panel of the court, presided by Justice Hama Akawu Baraka, held that the Federal High Court Umuahia had no jurisdiction to have entertained the case because the plaintiff Unduka Edede lacked the local standing to have filed the suit in the first place. But while determining the appeal on the merit, the Appellate Court held that the provision is unconstitutional because it violates Section 42, subsection 1A of the Constitution and denied a class of Nigerian citizens their right to participate in election. One of the clauses, as stated in Section 84, subsection 12, is that anyone holding a political office must relinquish the position before they can be eligible to participate in the electoral process, either as a candidate or as a delegate. For more on this development, let's bring in the spokesman of the House of Representatives, Benjamin Kalu, who joins us live via Zoom from Abuja. Thank you for joining us on TVC News at 7. Well, many are wondering what actually the matter is. The National Assembly has done its job, and of course, the court also now has done its own job. What exactly is this infringement that the lawmakers are talking about?
Attaches to jurisdiction, and our legal system attaches to jurisdiction. And the beauty of what happened today was that the court set aside judgment. And if it was set aside, the issue of execution that was paraded recently, that the execution should be the next line of action after the judgment in Umuahia, is standing on nothing as we speak. On the issue of whether it contravenes Section 42 of the Constitution, whether some class of individuals will be affected, defranchised by this, is what we will look at when we see the full letters of this judgment. The CTC of the judgment is what we'll be applying for by tomorrow or next tomorrow, and hoping by next week we'll equip ourselves with it. But this point must be made, that the mischief that the National Assembly set out to cure with this legislation is to increase the competitive element of credible election. You know, if you cannot say election is credible, if the competitive element is lopsided, we wanted to create a platform where anybody with undue advantage, comparative advantage that is against another contestant will be balanced. So 8412 wanted to balance that by saying, let us come before these particular people who want to elect us equal and seek for their permission to represent them in whatever capacity. So it was not targeting a particular class of individuals. It was trying to increase the element that will help us advance our democracy from where we are to where we ought to be. Accountability is there, transparency is there, and competitive element is there to be fair to all persons. So once we get this particular piece of document, the judgment of court, the CTC will be able to know how to respond. For now, what we are faced with, I just report from journalists and social media report, and the one you're just giving now may not be sufficient for an institution like ours to take a particular decision on the next line of action to take. We will wait for the CTC and then we'll take it up from there.
This election is less than a year away, and this electoral amendment was passed just recently. So many are wondering, was it actually intended, because it's very close to the election year and there might not be enough time for the back and forth that should naturally take place when an exercise of this nature takes place?
The issue of electoral reform definitely was put on the front burner of the National Assembly. In our legislative agenda, you will see there prominently written. But as you know, this Ninth Assembly have scored highly beyond other, assemblies, because this particular electoral act has gone to Mr. President about 6 times. And luckily enough, we've been able to push it through with Mr. President assenting to it. To say if it was well intended to cure the mischiefs within the electoral space before the next election, the answer is yes. It was intended to. That is the legislative intention of the legislators when we worked on this piece of legislation. So,
well, Mr. Kalu,
of the essence, I agree.
Okay.
Of the essence, I agree.
Yes, you've mentioned that it was intended to cure a mischief, as you put it. But I'm talking about the timing. The election is less than a year from now, and many would have expected a longer period of time so that all of the stakeholders would actually have a say, and contending issues that arise could be resolved before the polls.
One would have expected that it was passed earlier. Is that what your question is?
Yes, please.
That they act. You see, when we do our responsibility as allowed by the Constitution, the ball passes from our court to the court of the executive. We don't do our part and do the part of the executive. So if we are finished doing our job and we'll pass it to the executive, I think that question of yours should be going to the executive. Did they take their time before assenting to it or bringing it back to the National Assembly for a review? That is a question that they will be answering. As for us, it has been on the front burner from the day one, and we put all instruments in place to make sure that we give to Nigerians this electoral reform that we have always preached about. And I'm happy that Ninth Assembly was able to achieve. All we're talking about now is just a clause or a section out of the entire sections of this electoral reform that came with a lot of benefits that will advance our democracy. So it's actually something we all should be happy about. Yet there are still 1 or 2 complaints. No law is cast on stone as we progress, because I don't see this as an impediment to the next 2023 election. But as we progress, if there are areas for us to dust up, definitely like any other law, except it is the 10th commandment that is cast on stone, which cannot be changed. Every other law can be touched, pruned, or enhanced to be able to reflect the current realities in our society. And this will not be an exception, I must say. So we are all geared up to clean the electoral space as to advance our democracy, so that when we sit with other members in the Committee of the Nation, we will raise our shoulders high that we are driving closer to the expectations of credible election, if not so comfortably, at least comfortably.
Spokesman of the House of Representatives, Benjamin Kalu, joined us from Abuja. Thank you for joining us on TVC News at 7.